We talk a lot about computers being hacked and malware getting inside of systems and networks being taken over, but not a lot of us have had an opportunity to see that in action. And so that's what we want to do today, is to do a targeted attack demonstration. And so today we're going to collectively all become the bad guys. And our goal is to get inside of a particular network and get access to personally identifiable information. Because that personally identifiable information, then we can turn around and sell on the internet, make it available to online exchanges, that sort of a thing. Now, in order to get inside this network, we have to convince someone to click on a link that we're going to send their way. And in order to do that convincing, we have to do some external reconnaissance about that individual and find out as much information that we can about him on the internet, on social media, that sort of a thing, in order to create a very specially crafted email that we hope he can't resist. And we'll use a very common exploit, in this case a Java exploit, in the hope that he as well has a computer that is vulnerable to that same exploit. So, a few pieces of information about this particular presentation. First of all, this was done completely in a virtual environment. It wasn't actually done on a real network, which wouldn't be a good thing unless you had explicit permission to do so. And some of the stuff that we're doing in this environment didn't need to be done in production, so that's why it was done this way. Secondly, it was my intent originally to actually do this presentation live in front of groups of people that I was doing this presentation live for. And there are a lot of experts in the security industry who do presentations all the time, and they said, you know what, that's not necessarily a good idea, because if something goes wrong and you're having to reboot a virtual machine and everybody's having to sit around and wait, it's just not worth it. So what you should do instead is do it and videotape it, and then you can talk over the videotape, which is what I did. In addition, some of the tools and techniques that I used in here, those who may be out in the security community who are experts in a lot of this stuff may see that there are certain parts that might be missing, or pivoting wasn't done the way it would normally be done in this instance, and that was just basically just eliminated for simplicity in the presentation, but all that's assumed that it occurred. One other thing too is that the tools that I'm using in this particular presentation are some pretty basic tools in the industry, and they're good tools, but they're not the same as some of the advanced tools that modern hackers are using that do a lot of the stuff that we're going to do manually. It does it for them in an automated fashion. All that having been said, everything you're going to see here is real. There are no camera tricks involved. So let's get started. Okay, so where do we go to find out a lot of information about someone that we want to socially engineer, where that information pertains to what they do in their business, what they do in their professional life, and who they know in their professional life? Yes, you guessed it. socialengineerme.com, LinkedIn. And we're going to pick on this particular individual here with the dorky fish picture because it was the only way I could go after somebody real and not get in trouble. We can see skills and expertise, but more importantly here we can see who this person knows. And we're going to pick on someone who happens to work in the same department as him because we think that that might be someone who he may have a good relationship with. In addition to that, we also find an account for this guy on Twitter. And what can we find out on Twitter? We can find out what a person's interested in by who they follow. We can find out a lot of things, like for their example, this particular person, we know he's into fishing, and it appears to be into the Eastern Sierra too. Tahoe Fly Fishermen, Mammoth Lakes, Mono Lake Committee, Mammoth Lakes, Convict Lake Resort, Yosemite, Eastern Sierra Fly Fishing. And in addition, he even tweets about it. He's in Mammoth next week for fly fishing, Hot Creek, Convict Creek next to home, favorite place in California. So we already know a person that this guy knows. We know he has an interest in fly fishing. He likes to fly fish in the Eastern Sierra. So while this is only a start, the reality is we have enough information for this particular demonstration to put together a pretty nice phishing email. So before we send our email and set up our exploit, let's take a quick look at Dan's computer. He's running Windows 7. It's up to date, pretty modern operating system, but because Dan needs to do business with the state, he has to run an older, vulnerable version of Java, and we're counting on that. So here we go. We're going to create our email, which we've done, and you'll get a chance to see that in a second, and we're going to email that off to Dan. And in addition, we're going to set up our exploit, our web server basically, that's sitting there waiting for Dan to connect to it. So here's Dan. He's doing his work, and all of a sudden he sees the email come up. Hey Dan, you don't know me, but Dwayne Wood is a buddy of mine and mentioned to me that you're into fly fishing. I saw some of your trips on Twitter and noticed that you like the Eastern Sierra. I live up in the Mammoth area and just got off Hot Creek. Check out this beauty, the last picture on the page. Look me up next time you're up here. Wow, That's pretty cool. And as a matter of fact, Dan knows SierraDrifters.com. He goes there all the time. So what's he going to do? Sure enough, he clicks on the link. And guess what comes up? SierraDrifters.com. There's the website he's used to visiting. There's the real pictures. And the guy on the bottom of the page is supposedly the guy who sent him that message. Now, two things here. Number one, no fish were hurt in the filming of this video. That's true generally in the case of most fly fishing where it's catch and release. You catch the fish, take your picture with it, and put it back in the water. But the second thing is, what just happened here? And what happened was, we sent Dan a link to our web server, and his browser stopped briefly at our web server, picked up the exploit, and then our web server redirected him to the real site so that if he wasn't paying attention, it looks like you click on a link to Sierra Drifters and you end up going to Sierra Drifters. So back to our attacking system, here we are, and guess what? We have access to Dan's computer. And we can actually interact with his system, we can get a shell on his desktop, but what we really want is full control of his system, and so we want to get an account called the system account. But here's the problem. When we try to get that account, we run into the Windows 7 user access control. You ever been doing something in Windows 7 or Windows 8 and the screen goes blank and asks you for permission to do something? Well, that exists to keep us from doing exactly what we're trying to do right now. So what we're going to have to do is run another exploit to get past that user access control, which we're doing at the moment right here. And sure enough, even though it claims that the exploit failed, this time when we try to get system account, we now have access to the most powerful account in Windows. So what are we going to do? We're going to start a keystroke logger. Meanwhile, back at Dan's system, he's tired of working. He wants to get ready for his next trip. So because Dan's tired of working, he's going to get ready for his next trip. So he's going to go to his bank account and log into his bank and check to see how much money he has, because he wants to buy a new fly rod for the upcoming trip, maybe something a little lighter. And looks around, sees something he might be interested in, and what's Dan gonna do? He's gonna buy one. And he puts in his credit card number and his security code, name on the card, expiration date, that sort of thing. Meanwhile, back at our attacker's console, guess what we have? We have Dan's banking user account, his banking password, and his credit card, and his code on the back, and expiration, and so forth. Now that's pretty cool, but we didn't come here to steal credit card information. We can use that maybe later to buy something. But what we came here for is to get personally identifiable information. So we want to be able to do some internal reconnaissance on this network, and in order to do that internal reconnaissance, we need to become Dan. So the first thing we're going to do is steal his password. So we run a little utility that allows us to capture his password hash. On every Windows system, when you log in, Windows stores a copy of your password in an encrypted hash on the Windows system to enable single sign-on to work. So we take that hash and we run our password cracker against it, and bam, Dan has a really, really bad password. So now we have his password, and we're going to use that to do some internal reconnaissance. Let's start by opening up a terminal session to Dan's computer, so that we can actually see what Dan has access to. And sure enough, we can get access to Active Directory within his environment. And while Dan doesn't have write access to Active Directory, we can sure see everything, including all the users and computers, and we can do a lot of reconnaissance work here to determine which users and which computers might have the kind of information that we're looking for, might have this personally identifiable information. In addition to that, we can also, of course, see all the files that Dan has access to, his home directory, and those super secret security files as well. So we've done our internal reconnaissance, we've looked around, and we think that we have found a workstation on this network that may have access to the personally identifiable information we're looking for. And yes, it's a high-level HR manager within the organization. One of the first things we want to do is log into that machine, and we're going to use Dan's account because we have it. So we're going to go through Dan's machine and pivot and get access to this system, which we can get access to easily. And now we're going to connect and take a look at what this user's doing. This user's name is Sue. She's working on an onboard document, as most HR managers would do. And what we're really looking for here is the kind of information she has access to. And sure enough, there's the juicy stuff. PERS, that's Public Employees Retirement System information. Health insurance enrollment, user social security numbers, database passwords, all kinds of juicy stuff. But it's on a shared folder. We have full access to Sue's system using that system account. The problem is that system account doesn't have the same access to network resources that Sue does. Sue is the one that has access to those network resources. So in order to get access to those network resources ourselves, we need to become Sue. So we're going to clear the logs of any trace of us having looked on her system. We're going to look at her process that she's running on, and we're going to become that process. And so we become Sue. And now that we've become Sue, we can execute a shell on her desktop, and now we have access to her shared folders that she has access to. And we're going to take those files that we saw, and we're going to download them. We're going to exfiltrate them off this network through Dan's computer and to our computer. And sure enough, we are successful, and we have achieved our mission. We have the personally identifiable information we came here for.